hang on. Okay, I had to reset the timer.
According to Martins, a writer for Wall Street on Parade, if the average American knew that the same U.S. banks that devastated the housing market, blew up the U.S. economy, crashed the stock market, and threw millions of Americans out of work just a decade ago were warning in their own 10K legal filings to the Securities and Exchange Commission that this same thing could happen again at any moment, there'd be mobs with pitchforks in the street right now, I can guarantee you that. Today, we're going to learn about what derivatives are and why they're a dangerous financial instrument. For most of us, the crash of '08 feels like it had little to no effect on us individually, but perhaps when you look at it at a larger scale, it might be closer felt. Today, I want to discuss what derivatives are, why banks should be banned from creating and trading them, and we'll discuss why the derivatives bubble got out of control in the first place. I also want to give you steps that you can take as an individual to ensure that America avoids another financial disaster. According to Senator Christopher Dodd, chairman of the Senate Banking Committee, really what it boils down to, in simple terms that most Americans can understand, is that it's a wager. It's a bet. Mike Ingram, a broker at VGC Partners, says that a derivative can even be bought or sold based upon how much rainfall you think will happen in the future. It's basically a form of gambling, and banks do not always have enough capital to support their bet. In an article posted on Newsweek in March of 2010, by 2008, the notional value of the derivatives market, that is the size of the outstanding bets as measured by the value of the things being bet upon, was estimated to be $600 trillion. That's about $100,000 in derivative contracts for every man, woman, and child on this planet. After the crisis, Frank Dodd laws were put into place to hopefully reduce and regulate the derivatives market. But by 2018, according to New York Times, a decade after the crisis, the still $600 trillion market remains murky to regulators. In the past, if the past has proven anything, it's that banks dealing in derivatives can be disastrous. For example, in 2008, when the AIG fell, the American insurance giant, it was the American taxpayers that got stuck footing the bill, totaling about $185 billion. To make matters worse, after the financial crisis, loopholes within laws were enacted that basically allow banks to not have to report all of their derivatives holdings on their balance sheet. However, the restrictions on these type of transactions has not always been as loosely regulated, which brings me to my second point. According to Harvard Law School Forum posted July 21st, 2009, derivatives have been around for centuries, but so has derivative restrictions. And in the US and UK, derivatives were regulated primarily by common law rule known as rules against difference contracts. Although the common law rule did not stop bets from happening entirely, it did make it more difficult for someone to enforce their bet in court. Basically, one of the parties had to at least own the underlying asset and be using it strictly to hedge risk, not just purely for speculation. In the late 80s, when the United Kingdom passed its Financial Service Act in 1986, it removed the common law rule and made all financial derivatives, whether used for hedging or speculation, legally enforceable in court. Soon after, the U.S. followed suit by creating ad hoc exemptions for derivatives like contract or currency forward swaps and interest rate swaps, which are forms of derivatives. In 2000, the United States pushed the Commodities Futures Modernization Act, or the CFMA. This allowed all financial derivatives to be exempt from the CFTC and SEC oversight, and declared all financial derivatives legally enforceable in court. According to the Financial Crisis Inquiry Commission, in its official report on the crisis, more than 30 years of deregulation and self-reliance on self-regulation by financial institutions championed by former Federal Reserve Chair Alan Greenspan and others supported by successive administrations in Congress and actively pushed by the powerful financial industry at every turn had stripped away key safeguards which could have helped to avoid this catastrophe. This approach had opened up gaps in oversight of critical areas with trillions of dollars at risk in the shadow banking system and the over-the-counter derivatives market. It's unfair to taxpayers that we get stuck with no reward and all of the risk for the banks making mistakes. So let's discuss what you can do about it. If we were to reinstate the common law rule and amend the CFMA, banks would be forced to stop dealing in risky derivatives. So contact your elected official, let them know that you think taxpayers would be better off without banks creating and trading derivatives. Tell them you only give your vote to a candidate that does not support the derivative banking market. And secondly, After you've contacted your House and Senate representative, I challenge you to get out and vote in this next presidential 2020 election. Our current president passed the Banking Deregulation Act in 2018, which rolled back consumer protection and eased the restrictions on banks set in place after the Great Recession. According to Bank Dive, Trump has made deregulation the focus of some of his earliest executive orders. In the most well-known of these, he required federal agencies to eliminate 2 existing rules for any new rule that they issue. In another order, he directed the Treasury to evaluate laws, regulations, and other official orders against the goal of making banking as competitive as possible. I challenge you to find a candidate that supports the re-regulation of the common law rule and the amendment of the CFMA in the 2020 election. Senator Cory Booker will be my first choice, but I challenge you to find a candidate that supports your views as American taxpayers. Now that you understand that the dangers that are associated with derivatives, let me tell you, now that you understand the dangers associated with derivatives, don't let the banks continue to gamble on your dime anymore. Today we talked about what derivatives are and why they should be banks should be banned from creating and trading them. We discussed how derivative markets got out of control in the first place, and I gave you the steps you can take as an American taxpayer to hopefully prevent the next financial crisis in America, truthfully. While you may not want to grab your pitchforks and head to the streets quite yet, the fact that very little has been done to fix the derivatives bubble since the 2008 financial crisis should be a main priority of every engaged American and every presidential candidate in the next 2020 election. Thank you.